how to avoid listening to music. So this really deserves a full lecture. It really does. But I'm going to point out 4 things I'll try to point out about every sin that will facilitate a person to leave it. The first one is knowing Allah and loving Allah. Because ultimately, if you love Allah more than you love that music, that is what is going to be the motivator, and which is going to drive you to be able to give up that particular sin. The second thing is to know the reality of it. A lot of times people allow themselves to be confused by shubuhat. They allow themselves to get themselves lost and confused. It's not that bad. It's not a matter. The whole ummah didn't agree upon it. And they try to find something to find a way out. The reality of music, I'll just give you 2 things to look at. And I'm not the most knowledgeable person about the topic, but I'm just going to give you 2 things to think about. The first thing is music affects your emotions and affects your heart. And I think every fan of music would have to agree with me in that. Every person who loves to listen to music would have to agree with me. I believe, would have to agree with me that music affects your heart. Think of it like this. Why, when you go into a shop or a supermarket, are they playing music? If you look it up if you want to. They play it to influence your actions. Certain music makes you more likely to buy things. Certain music makes you more likely to be free spending with your money. Music affects your heart. It affects your emotions. It affects your actions. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there is no difference of opinion among those whose opinion is worthy of being counted that music is haram in Islam. And Allah Azza wa Jal did not make haram something which is good for you. He only made haram that which is bad for you. If there is a benefit in it, and I don't say there is, but if there is, then for sure the harm has to be more than the benefit. Because Allah Azza wa Jal does not make your religion difficult for you. If He made it haram, He made it haram for a reason. And it's haram by the text of the Quran and the text of the Sunnah and the agreement of the scholars. And no one should look at a shudud fil fatwa, a rare fatwa which goes against the grain of what all of the scholars of Islam agreed upon. That shouldn't trouble you. Ash-shadh la yu'tabar. We don't give attention and we don't give consideration to an outlier. I'll give you an example. Just in the worldly life, you do an experiment and you're measuring something. Let's just say you're measuring temperature, and your thermometer says 0 degrees, 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree. Then you take a measurement and it says 45, and then again you take another one and it says 0, 1. And it's an outlier. An outlier, you by your nature, by default, you cross it out and you say, I did it wrong. For how can you see the ulama of Islam all come together upon the prohibition of music? And the fact that you found one person in the history of Islam who didn't, and that person was refuted from every single angle. Why do you not consider it to be an outlier? Why do you not look at the Quran and the prohibition of music in the Quran and the prohibition of music in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? That's the next point. I'm going to bring a third point. Look at the lives of musicians, artists, whatever you want to call them. Just look at the kind of life they live. Not just today. I'm not talking about the recent scandals of various performers and musicians and whatever. Just look at the life they lead. I personally have read, just reading articles. I've read articles about the lives of musicians on tour in the 80s. I've read about the lives of musicians on tour in the 90s. And la yakhfa alaykum, what these people were doing after that and what has come out in recent days. My point is that one thing you will see is that actually all of these people behaved in a very similar way. No doubt some of them are worse than others. Bila shak, some of them are worse than others. But the things that went on in their parties and their gatherings are not that different. Not from the 80s, not from the 90s, not from the turn of the millennium or the decade after that or the decade that we're in. Drugs, zina, debauchery on a massive scale. And actually, you sometimes want to actually look and see some of these people who are in prison today and facing trial for what they did. You want to actually ask, in reality, what did they do wrong? What did they do wrong? A lack of consent. Otherwise, that which was going on everywhere, in every party, with every group of people, with all these celebrities and movie stars and musicians and performers and rappers, and all of these people were doing exactly the same thing. The issue is just consent, that's it. This one didn't consent. Otherwise, what they were doing day in, day out, this is a matter of tawatur. Nobody denies it. So I want to ask you, this kind of debauchery, this kind of filth, this kind of immorality, wholesale, day and night from these people, pick your musician, your rapper, your artist, pick which one and just read. And wallahi, you will find plenty. Because this behavior for them is completely normal. Some of them cross the lines they put for themselves, but otherwise this behavior is completely and totally normal. And if you don't think that's true, read about the 80s. Read about some of these groups, these famous groups, rock bands and whatever, and what they used to do on tour. Just read, Google it. Don't watch videos. Just Google an article about it. That is what, 40 years ago. 40 years ago, to be quite honest, I'm struggling to see the difference between what these shayateen are in jail for and what those people did in the 80s. A line of 13-year-old girls, one after the other after the other. My point is, people who live their lives like that across every genre of music, across every area, across every country, what does that say to you about what music is? What is it in the end? What does it say to you? If the standard is that the vast majority of people who go into it live their life like that, what does that actually say to you about what this thing actually does? But this is my second point, knowing the reality of the sin that you're engaged in. And it's enough for us that it's prohibited in the Quran and Sunnah. We don't need the rest. Like just min bab al-fa'ida, from the point of view of the fa'ida, the benefit, just a few of these things wake people up. I want to see, I'm still going to go, so I haven't finished. Lyrics. Lyrics. I want to know, if I were to take 1,000 songs from the last 20 years, and I were to look at the lyrics of each one, how many of those lyrics would contain outright major sins. Simple question, how many? A lot, huh? A lot. I'm talking about a lot. The overwhelming majority. And certain genres will be even worse than others. Some of them will be. But all of them have. All of them are going to talk about all different types of haram. So my point is, take all of that, put it together, realize it affects your heart. It's haram in the Quran and the Sunnah. It changes your actions. The people who do it are akhbathul khaba'ith. They're the most filthy, evil, immoral individuals. And then on top of that, realize what they're actually telling you to do. Realize the reality of the sin. So we said, knowing Allah and developing the love of Allah, realize the reality of the sin. Number 3, realize how it is that you get caught into this. And start putting in changes to stop that from happening. And number 4, replace it with something else. Don't, please, billahi alaykum, don't replace it with the same thing from a guy who's singing about Islam. Don't replace it from a guy playing the guitar and the piano and singing about Islam. La khayra fi. There's nothing good in it. Rather, waqa'a fil haram. He fell into the same haram that other people fell into, like he tried to make it, to find a way out of it from one way or another. And this is min al-bid'ah bila shak. It's from the bid'ah without a shadow of a doubt. The bid'ah of these anashid, where the person believes you can get close to Allah by singing like the kuffar and making music videos like the kuffar and playing instruments like the kuffar. هذا من البدع بلا شك. No doubt about it. But replace it with what? Replace it with listening to the Quran. If you find it that sometimes it's not appropriate to listen to the Quran, you don't feel like you're giving it your heart and your attention, listen to a lecture, listen to a podcast. If you don't feel ready for a lecture, listen to a nice podcasts that go out there, just generic information, things that you can just benefit from. Listen to some poetry, some inshad, not like the anashid of these Muslim musicians, but the inshad of shi'r, beneficial poetry being recited in a nice voice. There's so many things you can listen to, but you have to take that and you have to replace it with something else, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best.